So before we get started, I just want to make a couple introductions. Many of you have been here before. Oh, you're fine. We're just barely starting, so no worries. We are the Camas Valley History Group. We've been in operation for about 4.5, 5 years. 5 years? Okay. My name, most of you know me, but I'm Joe Frazier. I'm currently serving as the chairman of our group. The other people in our group are mostly in blue shirts here, and we have others that obviously couldn't be here. This is our second showing of this talk. We did one Saturday, and it's been really fun to research this topic, and I hope you enjoy it. So we'll go ahead and get started. Well, first of all, hello, and thank you for coming to our talk. Today, we're going to introduce you to the murky world of cowboys and outlaws, and more specifically, the gang of robbers and rustlers known as the Wild Bunch, and their connections to Camas Valley. Thanks to Hollywood, I'm sure some of you have probably already heard of the Wild Bunch, but who were they really? Let's start with some introductions. The first name that will be familiar is Butch Cassidy. He was born Robert Leroy Parker in 1866 in Beaver, Utah. He grew up in an LDS family in the small town of Circleville, Utah, but he was never content as a farmer and longed for a more adventurous life. He left home as a teenager to work briefly as an apprentice butcher, but mostly as a ranch hand or cowboy in Wyoming. On his first dairy ranch, he became friends with a drifter and cattle rustler named Mike Cassidy. The alias by which Parker is better known is a combination of a nickname from his brief job as a butcher and the name of his friend and arguably first mentor. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to refer to him from now on as Butch. Butch moved around ostensibly seeking ranch work, but quite possibly delivering stolen horses. After 1889, he traveled around the Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado territories, working at ranches and stealing horses and cattle as circumstances allowed. In 1894, he was arrested in Wyoming for stealing horses and served 2 years in the Wyoming State Prison in Laramie. This is probably the moment to talk about the situation in the Western Territories at this time. The Homestead Act of 1862 granted 160 acres in the West to anyone willing to reside on and improve that land. Settlers flocked west seeking cheap, plentiful land on which to raise herds of cattle. Yeah, come in. We just barely got started. Some ranching operations owned hundreds, if not thousands, of head of beef. Barbed wire was not patented until 1874, so most land was not fenced, and a brand was the only way for livestock to be claimed. Rustling was commonplace, since ranch hands rebranding a few animals here and there was not really noticeable. Incidentally, the first farmer to bring barbed wire to Camas Valley was Hiram Workman, father of Pearl Workman, who founded the Francis Frontier Store. He bought land in Francis in 1887 and spent a year grubbing and burning off sagebrush before establishing a dairy herd. His neighbors thought that he was crazy and that his cattle would be cut to pieces. Now back to Butch. In 1887, he met Matt Warner, who owned a racehorse in Telluride, Colorado. Butch and Warner raced the horse at various events, dividing the winnings between them. Let's pause here and talk about Matt Warner. He was born Willard Erastus Christiansen in Ephraim, Utah in 1864. Like Butch, he was raised LDS in central Utah. At 13 or 14 years old, he got into a fight with another young man over a girl. Thinking that he had killed him, Warner ran away from home. Again, like Butch, he became a ranch hand in northeastern Utah and western Colorado. While still a teen, he joined up with cattle rustlers working out of Browns Park, earning the nickname of the Mormon Kid. He was paid mostly in stolen cattle and horses and started his own ranch at Diamond Mountain, Utah. Remember Matt Warner, he's going to keep cropping up in our story. After that meeting, Butch and Warner added robbery to their resumes by holding up the San Miguel Valley Bank in Telluride, Colorado in 1889. Their reported haul was $21,000, over $500,000 in today's money. After that meeting, Butch and Warner, with his share of the proceeds, Butch bought a ranch in Wyoming not too far from the Hole in the Wall, a notorious hideout for outlaw gangs during the era. His brand was Reverse E Box E. However, this was probably a front for clandestine activities, as Butch was never financially successful at ranching. In 1894, he was arrested for stealing horses and served 2 years in the Wyoming State Prison in Laramie. A few months later, after his release, he was in Montpelier, Idaho, robbing a bank with the beginnings of his gang. They escaped with roughly $7,000 and soon began recruiting other members. William Ellsworth Elsie was born in Ohio in 1869 and grew up in northeastern Colorado. At 18, he left home looking for adventure and worked briefly for Matt Warner, now a ranch owner. Warner gave Lay his first tip for a robbery, and after this, Lay opened a gambling house in Vernal, Utah. After it was closed down by the local sheriff, Lay returned to Warner's ranch and connected with Butch, who had just been released from prison in Laramie, Wyoming for stealing horses. Harvey Alexander Kid Curry Logan was born in Iowa in 1867 and made his living breaking horses in Texas. There, he befriended a man named Flat-Nosed George Curry, from whom he took his new last name. He rode for a while with outlaw Tom Blackjack Ketchum and briefly joined a circus. After escaping the Deadwood jail, he headed back into Montana and started riding with Butch Cassidy. Thanks to having reputedly killed at least 9 law enforcement officers, he has since been referred to as the wildest of the wild bunch. William News Carver was born in Texas in 1868. He worked as a cowboy in Texas before venturing west to Wyoming and Utah. He married Vianna E. Byler, aunt of Laura Bullion. After his wife's death, Carver became involved with Josie Bassett. By 1896, Carver had become friends with Ben Kilpatrick. After a failed robbery, he fled to Robber's Roost in Utah, where he began riding with Cassidy's Wild Bunch. He gained the nickname News for supposedly enjoying seeing his name in newspaper stories of the gang's exploits. Ben, the tall Texan Kilpatrick, was born in Texas in 1874 and worked there as a cowboy for a time. He was the lover of Laura Bullion and is thought to have been a friend of Elsie Lay and Kid Curry. More about Laura and Josie Bassett and her sister later. Harry Alonzo Longabaugh was born in Pennsylvania in 1867. At 15, he moved to Colorado to help settle his cousin George's homestead. He found work as a wrangler at a neighboring ranch and learned to buy and breed horses. In 1886, he struck out on his own, drifting north and working on ranches. But in 1887, he stole a gun, horse, and saddle near Sundance, Wyoming. He served 18 months in jail and adopted the nickname the Sundance Kid from the name of the town where he was arrested. After his release, he moved to Canada and for a while was joint owner of a saloon in Calgary. But after quarreling with his partner, he headed south to Montana, where he began rustling cattle and horses. By 1897, he was part of Butch's gang. Historian Tom Hatch wrote, "Butch and Sundance had a lot in common. They both loved horses. They loved to drink, they loved to gamble, and they could talk larceny all day long." In the beginning, the gang was referred to as the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang from their hideout in a niche in the Great Red Wall of cliffs in the Hole-in-the-Wall Pass near Casey in Johnson County, Wyoming. The Wild Bunch name came from the Doolin Dalton Gang, another outlaw band active further east. Butch's band were the most successful train robbing gang in history. But in this case, the Wild actually referred not to their daring robberies, but for their supposedly epic celebrations that would follow. For roughly the next 10 years, they embarked on a daring and successful crime spree, robbing banks, trains, and coal companies across the West, and enjoying the tacit support of local farmers and landowners. Typically, they would commit robberies, then flee in different directions, laying low at ranches and several well-known outlaw hideouts along the outlaw trail. Besides Hole-in-the-Wall, other favorite hideouts were Brown's Park or Brown's Hole in Utah near the Colorado border, and Robber's Roost in southeastern Utah. All three hideouts provide a landscape that is easily defensible or gives views of the surrounding area that make it easy to see posses coming from miles away. At its height, Hole-in-the-Wall featured several cabins, a livery stable, a corral, livestock, and supplies, with each gang contributing to the upkeep of the site. As the myth of the Wild Bunch grew, those powerful executives and cattle kings who were being robbed took action. They hired the famed Pinkerton Detective Agency to catch them. Slowly but surely, members of the gang were captured or killed. Butch and Sundance escaped to Argentina, but even there they were unable to escape the long arm of the Pinkertons and met their end after a shootout in Bolivia, unless you believe some of the legends. So now we come to the $64,000 question. What does any of this have to do with Woodland? To answer that question, we need to look at two families that were early settlers in Woodland. Both families moved to Woodland in 1875, and since Woodland provided easy access to the needed commodities of trees and water, both were also involved in the timber and sawmill industry. Let's start with the Fraughton family. George Augustus Fraughton was a polygamist. Originally from New York, he and his first wife, Henrietta Case, came to Utah in 1854, initially settling in Provo and later moving to Heber. His second marriage in 1862 was to Mary Jane Simpson, daughter of Thurston Simpson. George Augustus settled this family in Woodland, the second family. David Lorenzo Fraughton, the sixth of 8 children born to George and Mary Jane, entered the world on November 14th, 1876 in Woodland, Utah. After moving to the Uinta Basin around 1885, Dave met and befriended Matt Warner. Warner had a ranch near the Browns Hole area, mostly populated by rustled cattle. Matt Warner became Dave's employer and sort of mentor, as he spent his late teens working as a cowhand on ranches, and inevitably, in the context of this story, ended up on the wrong side of the law. It's pretty certain that Dave met the other outlaws that made up the Wild Bunch at or near Matt Warner's ranch. Dave's first brush with the law was in 1894, after he and an outlaw called Cal the Mexican Luke stole and butchered a steer belonging to Joseph Burton. He was found guilty in 1895. Then, in 1896, so the story goes, Matt Warner got into a gun battle that left 2 men dead. Caleb Rhodes, the son of Rhodes Valley pioneer Thomas Rhodes, had contracted with Warner and several other men to stake claims on gold mines in the Uinta Mountains. One of the men tried to double-cross them, and a gunfight ensued. Warner insisted it was self-defense, but he was tried for murder. Convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to prison for 5 years. To pay for his attorney, Warner's friends, including Butch and Dave Fraughton, robbed a bank in Montpelier. If you remember the bank job that started the Wild Bunch's career, this was it. This was Dave's first introduction to robbery, even though he only helped with the horse relay, a bit like the getaway driver in a modern-day bank robbery, staging fresh horses at intervals so the thieves could get away. That same year, Dave was arrested with Will Bowditch for stealing cattle. This case has ties to Camas Valley, so here I'm going to go into a bit more detail. According to news reports, Dave and Will stole 24 head of cattle from George Milton Pace and Sons of Atkinson, Summit County, and tried to sell them to the Salt Lake Meat Company. Dave's mother did not believe he was guilty and wrote to the Salt Lake Herald to that effect, stating, "I notice in your paper that you have an idea that Dave Fraughton is a regular outlaw and one of Matt Warner's gang. It is a mistaken idea, and I feel it my duty to correct the mistake. He is very young and easily led." Mrs. Fraughton wrote that Dave was hired to herd sheep by a Mr. Bowditch, saying that this was the longest Dave had ever been away from home. She finished the letter, "Tell him to write to me and send me his address," and signed it from his poor old mother. Dave's employer was John Smith Bowditch of Taylorsville, who had large sheep interests in Salt Lake Valley. His son, William Charles, was the Will Bowditch with whom Dave was arrested. Bowditch Sr. was described by the Salt Lake Tribune as being quite heartbroken at the news and declared, "I've authorized him to make sales of stock in my absence. If he did steal those cattle, he was made the cat's paw of someone else." The paper went on to say that the boys' defense counsel was of the opinion that they had gotten into bad company. At trial, Will Bowditch claimed that he had been hired by a Mr. Mitchie to drive the cattle to Salt Lake City, where he, Mitchie, had offered them for sale. Dave confirmed this, saying that they were paid $2 each and that they were supposed to meet Mitchie in Emigration Canyon. In case they failed to connect, the boys had been instructed to take the animals to the church farm slaughtering place. Neither Dave nor Will had any idea that the cattle were stolen. Now, this is pure supposition on our part, and there's absolutely no proof to this idea, but Mitchie is another local name to Woodland. Robert Mitchie came to Woodland sometime before 1878 and served for a while as the settlement's postmaster. All accounts describe him as an upstanding citizen, but was he secretly a cattle rustler? He did have sons, so was one of them the bad company referenced by Dave and Will's lawyer? The truth, sadly, is lost to history. Now, family history has it that Dave's friends, i.e. the Wild Bunch, paid for his attorney, perhaps with more proceeds from the Montpelier robbery. The case went to 2 trials, and Bowditch Sr. had sufficient funds to bail his son out, but Dave spent a winter in jail. But in early 1897, they were finally found not guilty. Before we leave this story, I should also mention that several children of the alleged victim, George Milton Pace, settled in Camas Valley in Francis. So if you're a Fraughton, Mitchie, Potts, Pace, Prescott, Sweeney, Simpson, Mitchell, or Van Tassel, you might have a connection to this case. After his release, Dave worked the horse relay for several other crimes, including the daring daylight robbery of the Pleasant Valley coal mine payroll at Castle Gate in 1897, which netted the gang over $7,000 in silver and gold. Family history again says that after several of these robberies, Dave was left with saddlebags full of gold and cash, and he buried these saddlebags to retrieve later. Rumor has it that at least 2 of these caches of this buried loot are said to be hidden still somewhere in the Uinta Mountains. So if you're bored. The story goes quiet for a few years, but in 1901, Dave was in trouble again, this time for horse stealing. He led Sheriff Peter Swanson on a 2-day chase before being caught. He was taken to Vernal Jail before being transferred to Lander, Wyoming. 3 years later, he was back in Lander. His next big scrape took place in 1904 in Cody, Wyoming. On November 1st, 3 outlaws entered the First National Bank and told cashier Frank Middaugh to hand over the cash. Middaugh pulled a gun and started shooting. One of the outlaws killed him, and they fled under covering fire from another outlaw stationed across the street. A manhunt began, and a huge reward was offered, $10,000, which is over $300,000 today. The Washington Post reported that Buffalo Bill, William F. Cody, founder of the town, was joining the hunt with 2 of his best Sioux scouts. Kid Curry was suspected as the leader of the outlaws, in spite of the fact that he had been killed in June of 1904. The gang was tracked to Hole in the Wall. Cody said they undoubtedly came over from the Hole in the Wall country, and they're trying to get back into that den of thieves. Buffalo Bill told the press, but we will head them off, and of course, a stiff fight will take place when we catch them. Meanwhile, Dave and a friend, Bert Caldwell, had stolen a prize-winning saddle in Jensen, just south of Vernal. They were arrested and held in Vernal for grand larceny. Cody's sheriff, Horton, seems to have been informed of Dave's Wild Bunch connections, for he arrived at the jail and asked that Dave and Caldwell be extradited to Wyoming for the murder of cashier Middaugh. The various lawmen got into a dispute as to who could claim the reward, with Sheriff Horton claiming that it should go to him since he had been pursuing the bank robbers the longest. Finally, in spite of interventions from their Utah senator, a district judge, and their LDS bishop. In March, Dave and Bert were brought to Wyoming. There, it was discovered that both men actually had alibis. They'd been working in a mine elsewhere in the state at the time of the robbery and murder. In spite of claims that their brothers could have posed as them to secure their release, on September 7th, 1905, after nearly a year in jail, they were given their liberty. The Eastern Utah Advocate reported that the men were threatening to bring suit against some of the officials for depriving them of their liberty for the sake of the large rewards. The culprits were never found, and history does not record whether Dave ever received any damages. One man, however, did benefit. After failing to catch the robbers, Buffalo Bill decided to add a new act to his Wild West show, The Great Holdup and Bandit Hunters of the Union Pacific. The new edition, based on Thomas Edison's 1903 film, The Great Train Robbery, which was itself based on the Wild Bunch's Wyoming train robberies in 1899 and 1900, depicted Buffalo Bill battling outlaws as they attempted to rob a train. Dave's time in jail didn't encourage him to never get in another scrape. In 1907, he and two other men were caught in Shoshone, Wyoming for trying to pass a check of the Wind River National Bank for $50 made out to D.L. Ferguson, Dave's latest alias. He was sentenced to, got ahead of myself. He was sentenced to 8 years in the Rawlins, Wyoming State Prison for forgery. That last sentence, however, did convince Dave to go straight. He was released for good behavior after serving the minimum of 5 years and 3 months. In 1918, he married Edna Mae Petty of Neola, Utah, and although the marriage didn't last, they had 2 children together. He then moved to Park City to live with his brother, helping to raise his niece and nephews. He passed in 1939 and is buried in the Park City Cemetery. Now, for the other Woodland Wild Bunch connection. This one is much less well documented and mysterious, and leads us to the final group of outlaw associates, the Wild Bunch women. It's said that only 5 women were allowed into the Wild Bunch hideout at Robber's Roost: Laura Bullion, Josie and Ann Bassett, Della Moore, and Etta Place. Laura Bullion was a bona fide member of the gang. Nicknamed the Thorny or Wild Bunch Rose, she sold stolen goods for the gang and may have taken part in train robberies disguised as a boy. She is believed to have been born in Texas in 1876. Her father was an outlaw acquainted with Carver and Kilpatrick, and she had relationships with both men. In 1901, she was arrested with Kilpatrick with $8,500 in unsigned banknotes taken in the Great Northern Train robbery. She served 3.5 years in prison. After her release, she moved to Memphis, Tennessee, where she worked as a seamstress and interior designer. She died in 1961, the last surviving member of the Wild Bunch. And what a looker. Josie and Ann Bassett. Josie was born in Arkansas in 1874. The family moved west when Josie was young, and Ann was born near Browns Park, Colorado in 1878. Their father had a profitable cattle ranch straddling Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado, and often supplied outlaws with fresh horses and beef. Both girls were educated at Eastern boarding schools, but preferred cowboying to being ladies. Their mother became involved in a fight against powerful cattlemen's associations, and both sisters took up the feud, although Anne became better known, with newspapers dubbing her Queen Anne Bassett. Neither was ever convicted of any crime. Both had romantic relationships with different Wild Bunch gang members, but none lasted. Anne was married twice, and Josie 5 times. Anne died in 1956 and Josie in 1964. Della Moore, also known as Annie Rogers and Maud Williams, was a prostitute, best known as the girlfriend of Kid Curry, but much of her life is a mystery. She is believed to have been born around 1880 in Texas and began working in brothels around the age of 15. By 1899, she was working in the brothel owned by well-known Madam Fanny Porter and had already begun a relationship with Curry. In 1901, she was arrested in Nashville for passing a banknote that was known to have been stolen in a robbery by Curry. She was jailed, but was later acquitted. She and Curry never saw one another again, and little more is known of her life. It is believed that she later became a teacher, dying around 1926, but that is unconfirmed. Etta Place is even more of a mystery. Etta Place was not her real name. Place was Sundance's mother's maiden name, and he sometimes used the alias Harry Place. The Pinkerton Detective Agency variously referred to her as Ethel, Eva, Rita, Etta, and Betty Price. Though some accounts tell that she was a school teacher from Texas, most historians believe that she also was a prostitute working for Fanny Porter when she and Sundance met in 1899. The Pinkertons, The Pinkertons described her as having classic good looks, 5'4" to 5'3" or 5'5" in height, weighing between 110 and 115 pounds, with a medium build and brown hair. Only one known photo exists, which is this photo on the right. And it was taken in 1901 after her wedding to Sundance in New York City. After that photo was taken, Butch, Sundance, and Etta sailed for Argentina under the names James Ryan and Mr. and Mrs. Harry Place. It's thought Etta joined them in their escapades in South America, assisting them with getaway horses and posing as a distraction. But what happened next? There are more theories about her later life than there are about her identity. So let's talk about that. Her identity, I mean. It's been suggested that Etta Place was in fact Ethel Bishop, a woman who lived at a bordello around the corner from Fanny Porter's. On the 1900 census, Bishop's occupation was given as unemployed music teacher. Born in West Virginia in September 1876, she was 23 at that time. This hypothesis combines the claim that she was a school teacher with the one that she was a prostitute. Another conjecture is that she was Laura Ethel Place Capel. Ethel was born in 1877 in Salt Lake City. The story goes that her father died in Tombstone, Arizona in 1892, and she ended up at Fanny Porter's. Butch met her there and brought her back to Utah, where he placed her with a good Mormon family, the Thanes. Ethel taught school for a while before taking up with Sundance, which brings us back to Woodland again. John Johnson Thane was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1825. He arrived in Canada with his parents in 1828, and in 1848, he married Sidney Boyer. They moved to Iowa in 1854, and in 1861, they crossed the plains to Salt Lake City. By now, they had 11 children and agreed to take with them a young English woman named Elizabeth Hunt to help with the family. She could not afford the crossing, and on arrival, it was decided that she should become John's second wife. John and Elizabeth would have 5 boys together, all born in the Salt Lake Valley. Elizabeth and the boys lived in Mill Creek Canyon, with the older boys from the first marriage tending to a sawmill there until Elizabeth's death in 1875. Soon after, John moved to Woodland and constructed and operated a sawmill. Sidney and the remaining family members moved there as well once a house was built. It is at this point in the family history that things get murky. Some accounts of the Thane family history suggest that John Johnson and Elizabeth had a daughter by the name of Anna Marie. She's usually said to be a twin to their 4th son, Edgar Hunt Thane. Now, prior to 1895, Utah did not require birth and death certificates. Those that do exist are usually limited to larger cities such as Salt Lake or Provo. This means that not much of Utah family history pre-1895 is what we today, this does mean that much of Utah family history pre-1895 is what we would today refer to as crowdsourced, including on the most prominent internet databases for genealogy like Ancestry and Family Search. Anyone can add information to a person's genealogy page, such as family stories passed down through generations. These are neither true nor false, simply one person's memories of an event. And as any attorney will tell you, eyewitness accounts are often extremely unreliable. I say this simply to let you know that what comes next in the Thane family history is somewhere between truth and folklore. There's no hard evidence to prove or disprove it, so it's up to you to decide. Since there were no birth certificates at the time, there is no legal proof that Anne Marie was not the child of John Johnson and Elizabeth Thane. However, 2 of Elizabeth's sons have written separate short histories of their mother and their childhood, and both state that Elizabeth had 5 sons and no daughters. So why is it said that there was a daughter named Anna or Annie? The one piece of hard evidence that exists is the 1880 U.S. Census, which places the family in Woodland. And as you can see in this picture, the second name from the bottom is Annie, and her age is 11, the same age as Edgar. She is listed as a daughter. So, if we believe that Annie was not the daughter of the second wife, Elizabeth, could she be the child of the first wife, Sidney? Well, Sidney was born in 1824, and her last child was born in 1865. She would have been 45 or 46 years old when Anne Marie was born. It's possible, but not very likely. Another answer is suggested by Elizabeth's middle son, Brigham Hunt Thane. In a short history of his family, he writes, Elizabeth died 21 June 1875 at age 36, leaving 4 sons for Sidney to raise. When the family moved to Woodland, Utah in 1875, the Thane family now consisted of the adopted children of Justin Peters. Justin Peters was a widower who worked for John Johnson Thane, and after he died, John and Sidney adopted Frank, Annis, and Albert Peters. There are records of a George Justice Peters, marking him as a German immigrant. In different records, his name has been written as Justin, Justice with a US, Justice with an ICE, and George J. He is known to have passed away in 1872 in Mill Creek, specifically at Thanes Mill. His children, Benjamin Franklin, Frank, Albert, and Annis Ellen Peters, became part of the Thane family. I think it's safe to say that the Annie in the 1880 census was in fact Annis Ellen Peters. So now that we know Annie Thane's origins, let's talk about why she matters. The Thane family left Woodland in 1886 and moved to Wellington, Utah, just south of Price. Annie would have been around 16 at that time, and by all accounts, she was a bit of a wild kid. It's possible that the family came in contact with members of the Wild Bunch. If you remember, Butch was from central Utah. It's also claimed that Butch sometimes helped polygamous Mormon families by helping them hide out at Robber's Roost, so he may have come across the Thanes in that context. Moreover, one of the first robberies committed by the Wild Bunch was the Castle Gate payroll job, one of those robberies where it's presumed Dave Fraughton ran the horse relays. Castle Gate and Wellington are just 20 miles apart. In this book, Butch Cassidy, My Brother, Butch's sister, Lula Parker Bettinson, claims unequivocally that Annie Thane was a one-time girlfriend of both Butch and Sundance. Because of the somewhat unknown origins of both women, people began to suspect or suggest that Annie Thane and Etta Place were in fact the same woman. In the early 1970s, a man started making the rounds on TV and radio programs, claiming he was the son of Annie Thane and the Sundance Kid. He went by the name of Robert Harvey Longabaugh, and he knew some things that were not common knowledge, so his claims could not be completely discounted. This fellow died in 1972 in Missoula, Montana, and his headstone reads, Robert H. Longabaugh. Another possible story comes from the DUP publication, Pioneer Pathways. In volume 11, it suggests that Annie Thane was a close friend of Etta Place, and that she, Annie, dated the Sundance Kid and eloped with him before discovering that he was already married to Etta. She gave birth in 1901 to a boy named either Harold Thane Longabaugh or Robert Harvey Longabaugh. Since Sundance was already married and also no longer in the country, Annie took up with Kid Curry. In this version of the story, Annie Thane is therefore the woman known as Annie Rogers, aka Maud Williams, aka Delamore. Was Annie Thane the mysterious Etta Place or the equally alluring Delamore? I'm going to leave you with a quote from another great Western film. This is the West, sir. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. It's up to you to decide what you want to believe about this story. Thank you. See if I can turn the lights up. Any questions that we can make up answers to? This was an interesting story. I was actually on Family Search, and someone in the descendants of the Thanes had put a handwritten history that suggests, well, it actually said Annie Thane had Sundance Kid's baby. And that's where I found this connection. And then there's a lot of pieces that you have to go and grab, like the census, like family histories. There are the books that we mentioned. A lot of family members of Butch Cassidy would swear up and down he did not die in South America, that they actually came back. I believe his sister that wrote the book, Butch Cassidy, my brother, claims that he died in 1939 in Oregon or Washington, and that she actually met up with him several times in Utah around the family home. So there are a lot of what wouldn't necessarily be described as scholarly researched books about this kind of connection, including one about Dave Fraughton, again, written by his great niece. That are a lot of, I was told, my dad knew Butch and he told me this, and second and third hand actual stories. So that's why it's very questionable, but fun.
They felt like they had a connection to this?
So there were actually, as I mentioned, we did this talk Saturday, and in the audience we had, I think it was a great grandson of Elsie Lay. We had a descendant, and I don't know exactly where they fit in, but he was a Thane who lived out in the basin. But then I will say, for those of you that are locals, the oldest Thane daughter, so it would have been the first wife's, Sydney's oldest child, married Henry Moon. So if you know any of the Moons, they are direct descendants. But no, besides them coming Saturday, like Craig Van Tassel was there, and he's a direct descendant through marriage. One of the Thanes married Van Tassel. Yeah, when you have, what they have, 16 kids, and something like 8 of them or 10, somewhere in there, were girls that married mostly guys from Woodland. There are a lot of relatives. Yes.
Do you think it's true that that's stop the rest of the gang from killing or using violence?
So from what I have read about Butch Cassidy, he was, except for the robbery part, he was a pretty good guy. Everybody claims that he never killed anyone. In fact, the only one that they know for sure killed somebody was Kid Curry, who killed a lot of people and enjoyed it, I think, somewhat. But I think that's why a lot of the ranchers and that where the outlaws hid out would actually help the outlaws, because they did share that money. Besides buying the one ranch, Butch never really had any belongings that he owned. He didn't buy property anywhere else that we know of. So something happened to that money, and I think a lot of it was shared. How much? Who knows? How much is still hidden? That's another fun story you can dive into. Yes, well, for the Fiesta Days hike, we're going to look for the saddlebags.
So a lot of these places still exist, like his house in Centerville.
Yes. So his house in Circleville, you can actually go visit. It's just the shell now, of the log cabin. Browns Park, Browns Hole, from what I understand, is privately owned, but there's some like state park camping areas that are named after the areas. And so Oh, I thought, but yes, these places still exist. It's just like the Robbers Roost is somewhat changed because of Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell, and I think you can still go to where it was, but it's different. And so yes, but a lot of them have been preserved as Laramie, no, but Rollins, yes. Rollins, you can take tours of it. So I'll share, my sister-in-law grew up in Rollins. So when they got married, we went to Rollins, and she was a tour guide at one time in the jail. So we got a midnight showing tour of the prison with the family, and it's Alcatraz without the modern, but it was used until I think the 70s. So there is an actual execution chamber, and so where the it is. Yeah. Yes, and I believe they still do. I don't think they do the nighttime tours, but I believe they still do the daytime. But the cells are a lot like if you've been to Alcatraz, that size.
Site at Montpelier Island is very extensive.
Oh,
Spent good afternoon touring the
and someone Saturday said that up until a couple years ago, instead of having a 24th of July Pioneer Day in Montpelier, they actually had Butch Cassidy Day. So they said they had a little mobile saloon that they'd roll out in the street. And so, yeah, there's. Yes. Yeah, yeah. Anything else?
Did Butch Cassidy and Annie's possible son have descendants?
From what I have read, he did not have any children. So, and I don't remember reading that he was ever married. There's very little about him besides like that 1970s period where, if that even was him, but it seems like the Sundance did have a kid. We just, yeah, don't know who with. And
I've seen some sources, I thought that it was Bolivia, not Argentina.
so my understanding is they went to Argentina, but then actually bought property in Bolivia and tried to farm. And yes, so you're correct. Yes.
Section. Question is that the Pinkertons were under such scrutiny to bring him to justice or eliminate him that creates, their claims that he was disposed of was put into question because of the pressure they're under to kind of put this away.
Yeah. And I think that's important to understand is they're getting paid to eliminate the problem. So anything they can say that suggests it's been eliminated is going to get them paid more, or at least end the contract. And there's a very good the Pinkerton agent that was the lead agent, and his name just slipped my mind, has written a book that documents their side of it very well. But yeah, that there is definitely questions, I guess, about the Bolivia Argentina thing, because like I said, all kinds of family members have claimed they met with Butch and Sundance after, and it's not clear even if Etta, or whatever we want to call her, was there when they were supposedly killed, or if she was back in the United States by then. So yes, so again, they have people that, because that's the other thing I forgot to mention. Matt Warner, after he was released from prison, they robbed the Montpelier Bank to get money for a big name attorney. But it didn't work. He still went to prison for 4 or 5 years, and then was actually, he was released and promised on his release not to commit any more crimes. He went to Price, Utah, and became a lawman for the rest of his life. So yeah, he said that he saw the bodies of the South American people, whoever we want to call them, and he said that it wasn't them.
To decide to go straight. The film is there any evidence that they actually did try and go straight and just couldn't manage it?
Yeah, so when they went to New York, which was just previous to going to South America, it's when Sundance got married. They were just sauntering around New York because no one knew them back east. No one was looking for them. They went to South America and actually bought ranch land, raised cattle and horses for a while. And then again, depending on what you believe, or they claim that Sundance got bored and wanted to go back into that life. So I think it was their plan to go straight. It was just not in their nature to go straight. Yeah. And, I think in a lot of ways they didn't feel they were hurting anybody because they weren't killing anyone. A lot of this money was those rich cattle barons that were chasing the small people out and making it hard to earn a living for a common person.
So that's
It doesn't really, I don't know, Kate, it doesn't really hit on that anywhere. And the Wild Bunch was active for about 10 years. And they were only committing maybe on average 1 robbery a year. There was only like 10 robberies that the gang was involved in those 10 years. Up until about midway, Sundance, maybe not quite midway, but 3 or 4 years in, Sundance wasn't part of the gang. Butch's best friend was actually the LZ Lay. That's who he was closest to. But as we mentioned, most of the rest of the gang, by the time they were going to South America, was dead or in prison. So I think Sundance was there with Butch. I think he would have been with someone else. I don't think they were that good of friends, if that makes, I mean, yeah, Butch Cassidy and LZ Lay doesn't have the same ring. Yeah, he didn't, neither of them had the best nickname. They needed to work on, I mean, Kid Curry or Sundance, that's much better than Butch and LZ.
Didn't a lot of the gangs, there was groups of gangs, and if they robbed something, if they didn't know who they were, they just blamed somebody.
Yeah, and I think it was a lot of, well, and let me say this, to say the Wild Bunch was a gang and Butch was the leader would be misleading. They were a group that got together, and there were guys here and guys there that joined, and there were some of them that went on other robberies. And yeah, whoever was the most well-known or had the biggest reward was who they blamed at the time. So if you were, John Smith and without a cool flat nose nickname or something, you could go rob anything and they'd blame the guy named Flatnose. So yeah, I think we underestimate the importance of the cattle baron, and no fences, so that they were just, and the railroads, obviously, because they got every other plot of 640 acres. It was like a checkerboard. And so, yeah, railroads were a huge, they took advantage. I won't say they were criminal in what they did, right? But I think we underestimate how big of a draw those big cattle companies and railroads were, and how much they destroyed just the farmer with 2 cows. And
You had to put ranch in the middle of where the guy wanted to raise cattle. You didn't stay one.
yeah, and there's lots of stories of these cattle barons hiring, it could have been the Pinkertons, they're just hiring a gunslinger, and if they wanted the land you were on, they said, that's my land, and you said, no, it's not, and then you had a gun in your face, so you could either go or go. Oh, thank you. So that is one other connection we have here in the Valley. The grandson of Matt Warner actually lives here. His name's D. Warner. He and his wife live in Camas East, but we hope he's, again, I'll watch what I say for age-conscious people. He's a gentleman that's older than some of us. So if he's healthy enough and able, we will have him come do a talk on Matt Warner, and because he's a very fascinating man, and his wife ended up dying while he was in prison and of cancer and stuff. So a huge, there's a lot more story to that, and he's done that for the last 20 years, as I understand it, gone around and given talks on his grandfather. It was, so I think Matt wrote his own. Yeah. And then the other book that was written by Fraughton's grandniece, also, it's called Butch Cassidy, Matt Warner, and the Unknown Outlaw. So it talks about him. But again, that's the one that's very laced with hearsay, that my dad told me that Dave told him, type of thing. So, and she's the one that, I mean, she's dead now, but she was going with her dad on backpacking trips to find the lost saddlebags, and she didn't do it yet. So
Going through help.
yes.
Yeah. Always, good. We stayed at a bed and breakfast. And great time to help.
Yeah, they've done a great job revitalizing it. But yeah, I said Matt Warner was a lawman in Price, but it was that area. So he was justice of the peace. It could have been in Helper, and yeah, so yeah. Anything else? I made up all the answers I could. Yes, thank you all for coming.